Hello Internet, in this video we are going to be making this a little bit better. So right now we have wind that sort of deforms our snow, so it kind of pushes it a little bit. The problem is we implemented that in not the best way. The way it's implemented now, it always goes in a specific angle. So it always goes along the x-axis, and it's consistent across the entire terrain. I don't really like that. So what we're going to be doing is changing that up a bit. So my plan is I want to do a splat map. So what a splat map is, if you're not familiar in terrain speak, is a texture that sort of covers your terrain, and it covers the entire terrain, and you can use it to define characteristics of it. In this case, we're going to define how the wind affects specific places. And so the cool thing with this, if we do this implementation right, we should be able to actually do, like, if you have a rock in your snow, we should be able to have the backside of that, assuming you don't have dynamic wind, the backside of the rock should not have any wind on it, or it will have a very different wind pattern, maybe some sort of spiral or something, just due to the nature of the rock. And so this will give us the ability to actually simulate that, I hope. So what I've done is I have Photoshop, and we have this red texture. Not doing anything with that yet, but the cool thing with Unity is you can open PSD files in Unity. So I have that file here. It's called wind direction, and we should just be able to bounce back and forth. First thing we need to do is tie this wind direction texture into our current compute shader. This, since it's red, should map directly to exactly what we have already. So this should create the same effect without any changes. Before we do anything though, I'm actually going to tweak one thing. We have this recovery time. I'm setting that to 0. This is going to prevent snow from recovering besides wind. So the wind is going to move things around, but that's it. So it's just going to shift things. We're going to increase that a bit more, and you can kind of see now how it slides this way. And so that is our wind. We want to make sure our texture replicates that. So hopefully what we can do is take this and plug it into this snow physics simulator as another input. And that should be a constant. I'm not anticipating changing this. If you want to change it, you can figure out how to implement that. All you'll need to do is just update the texture in the compute shader. So for us, we just need one thing, and that's going to be another public texture, and we're just going to call this the wind direction. And now I only really care about 2 of the values in this texture. Care about the red value and the green value. That's just going to be our X and our Y. The other 2 we'll save in case we want to use something else. A lot of these things, if you use somebody else's terrain pack or textures or something like that, for these kind of maps, they'll actually put a bunch of things on top of it. And the advantage of that is that we don't actually have any of this advanced stuff just taking up a bunch of memory on our graphics card that we don't need it to. So for example, since we have a depth texture, we could theoretically take that depth texture and this wind direction and actually put them all in the same texture, because one uses 1 channel and one uses 2. So we'd still have 1 channel left over, and everything would still work. That's an option. We're not going to do that in this video, but if you're curious, you can look into that. It's not too difficult. You just need to change how your shader works. So we have a wind direction. Let's in this awake. Let's just set that up. And all we need to do is take this calculation engine, set texture, and I need to set that down up here. And instead of doing, like, we have it set to overwrite, there's actually a physics simulation ID. That's the ID we want to flash to, or set the texture to, because that is actually what we're going to be using. I don't have a name for it yet, so we'll probably want to add that, and I'm going to actually move these together because otherwise this doesn't really make any sense. And we'll change this, what I call it, wind direction. Wind direction map. I think that's a better name than just wind direction. That makes it seem more like you'd expect a vector. We're not going to do that. So part of the problem with this solution, it's not going to tie into Unity's wind system. It's not going to do any of that. If you want to do that, you could probably make it work that way, but we're not really worrying about that. So wind direction, we're just going to call this our wind direction, I guess, sure. And then on our compute shader, we've got these inputs. I just need another one. So sampler 2D, we're just going to have our wind direction. Okay. If I'm calling it map, we're just going to call it map. I don't know why I'm hesitating there, but it just makes way more sense to keep it consistent, because otherwise it's going to become a mess later. So this way it's consistent across everything. We have a wind direction and a wind direction here. The only thing that I need to do now is actually sample it. So we need a float 4 of our wind direction. And this is actually going to give us a vector that the wind should go along at a specific point in space. So the way this works is we have this map, which is a whole, think of this texture map, this giant red texture map, as a giant list of vectors. This is 512 by 512. So we have thousands of vectors. Every single pixel is a vector. What we're doing here is actually converting those vectors from color into vectors that we can actually use. And then we're taking the X and Y components of that vector and using it to actually translate our texture. So currently I can show you, we shift based on the wind speed times the elapsed time. So this is currently how we're doing our shift. It's a fixed thing and it affects our X. We don't want that. Instead, I want to be able to calculate that based on the wind direction. So what that's going to look like is actually should be able to just copy this, paste that there. We don't need a wind speed or an elapsed time. Instead, what I'm going to do is actually multiply them on the end. And so what that's going to do is take our wind speed times our elapsed time times the result. So that gets us a giant vector that is the actual amount of direction or distance the wind should go in that length. I think that makes more sense. Right now, we don't care about using a normalized vector for the wind. So I think this makes sense for now. And so this is going to get us our result out from our wind direction texture. I can remove the parentheses there. That way it's just a simple, find it at these specific points, multiply it by this. This gets us a vector that we can use to move all of this stuff. And so really, all I need to do is something like direction or wind direction.x and plus wind direction.y. We should just be able to modify these by adding them together. So it should just be able to do this, which is our offset plus the wind direction. So it's going to take a specific point plus some wind direction. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, we can do this even better. So let me just add a negative wind direction onto the left state, the previous state. We may want to reword some of that, or the inherit. I don't know what we'll call those. I'll work that out after the fact. I have no idea what a good name would be. But for now, you'll notice we have duplicates. So this is the same for all 4 of these texture lookups. That's probably not great. Let's float for texture UV. Sure. We could just call it the UV. Let's lowercase that v. When you're doing what's it called? Acronyms like HTML or www or URL or UV. For me, at least, I've traditionally preferred or only capitalizing the first letter. Some people will capitalize the entire thing. part of the issue I've run into with that is there's like serialization frameworks assume the other one because they can't obviously tell that you're using an acronym. And so what will happen is they'll serialize it as if they're separate words in that case. And that can be confusing. It also gets confusing if you have like A or other one-letter words in there, like I. When that happens, it can just be confusing. So this way, at least for me, since I use it as a standard, it's very obvious that this is two words, and one of them is a UV. So don't know if that's helpful, but there's some of what I try to do. So now that we have this texture UV, I should be able to just plug this in here and here and here and here. And that makes it way cleaner. It's way easier to read this than it was the previous thing. We know we're just looking up our position in space. We don't have to evaluate the math. That name, assuming we named it correctly, gives us a lot more information and is way easier to decipher and makes this whole thing a lot easier to read. We know that we're just offsetting our texture point by a wind direction, and that's it. So hopefully that's easier to understand. That should be everything. We should have our sampler working. So this should actually now be reading from that texture once we actually set up the texture. So now that I compile this, we should see a texture input pop up over here. I just need to plug in what I'm getting from Photoshop and plug it into that script, and then everything should be awesome. Or explode. Exploding is always an option. It seemed like it exploded and didn't explode at the same time. We got our texture point, but it looks like our compute shader broke. Wind direction is undeclared because I still didn't name it right. Great. I'm setting a great standard there. So there we go. That should clear that up. And now if I start this, hopefully, we should see it cascade a little bit. I may need to increase the force because, yeah. Okay, so we're still seeing the wind come and wash things away. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. So now we can play with this texture and actually do some interesting things. The cool thing about that is I can actually, let's set that to something bigger. 50, sure, why not? What about this? Wheel motion vectors. I have no idea where that's from, but it's got some blue at the top and then it's got like a cone, which should kind of give us a bunch of things because red and green are the texture channels we're using. Green is going to be Y, so it should be this way on your screen, and then X is going to be this way. So if I do this, we'll have some parts going one way and some parts going the other way, theoretically. We can go back to the other texture later, but this will at least give us a way to play with this without having to do any additional work. And so now you can see, like up here in the top corner, it actually comes towards me. Camera's backwards, but you get the idea. It's coming this way. And so it's all going in different directions and being interesting. And interesting is good. I don't like this though. And this isn't correct. So part of the issue, we gave it an X and a Y. But we only have, in our texture, we only have a range from 0 to 1, which means we can only go in two directions. We can only go in positive X and positive Y, at least with this solution. The way UVs, for example, will work is 0.5 is the middle point. 0.5 is 0. And then things that are below 0.5 go from 0 to 1, and things that are above 0.5 go from 0 to -1 and 0 to +1. So if we want to do the same thing here, we can. All we have to do is subtract another 4 of 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. So this is going to move our texture from 0 to 1 to -0.5 to 0.5. And then what we can do is multiply that by 2 which will get us a vector from -1 to +1. So it just expands the scope and shifts it a little bit. So the ×2 is effectively increasing the scale to 2 units, and then this is just shifting it. That should, hopefully, make it so we get something that comes in a more direction than just down towards me. Or not. It's all still coming this way. And maybe that's just because this texture. Let's see, we can actually, we've got this, so let's play with this. The easiest way I found to do gradients in Photoshop is just to use the layer style stuff. So we've got this gradient. That might be cool. But what we can do is create a gradient between red, and then I want to go to black. I'm trying to think of what this would look like. So somewhere in the middle, there's going to be something that is both red and green, but nothing else. That'll be yellow, sure. And then on both ends, we want it to be the same. I'm effectively making a spiral, or a, what's it called? Let's actually shift this. So a radial, that's not right. Angle, cool. So you'll see we have one point, and effectively what I'm trying to do is get it to spread out from that point. So my idea is to do, I actually don't want yellow there. I want something like this with another one in the middle. Set that to 50. This one can be red. And actually that's not what I want. So again, we have everything from 0.5, or yeah, the middle point is 0, which means there'll be no action on that axis. So actually I want 128, which will be the middle-ish. And that will mean green, or our y-axis, isn't going to do anything. It will still have red, so red will go in one direction here. I'm actually going to make this 0 because we have the other direction already. And so both of these sides are going to be 128, and we'll keep 255, which is just the maximum red value. And completing this should get everything nice and aligned again. And then we just need to tweak our two y values here. These yellow ones, those aren't what I want. I actually want this to be down at 128. And that, hopefully, if I'm thinking of my math correctly, is going to get us to blend nicely between all of them. And if I did my math wrong, then we'll still get something interesting. It just won't be what I wanted. But there you go. Hopefully, those two corners will go in one way and the other ones will go in the other direction. I'm going to set this to 0, and then our x's should align on the x and y should align on the y. That may get flipped in our actual terrain, but whatever. So, should be able to save this. Sure. And now, let's actually bring that texture back in. So we've got our wind, plug that in, and let's see what we get. This is mostly just experimentation, trying to figure out if anything looks good. That doesn't seem right to me. I would expect it to either all collapse. No, I would expect it to go out in some fashion. Like it's sort of doing that, but it's all going in one direction. And that doesn't feel right. So, how can we test that? We've got our wind direction. I think it's because, let's see here, wind direction wind.z, we'll set that to 0, and wind direction.a, we'll set that to 0 as well. And this way, both of those are 0. We only get our x and our y coordinate for our UV texture lookup. I think that might have been what was causing the issue, because we'd still, like with an alpha channel, we would get some unexpected information. This is looking a little bit better, because you can kind of see it's streaking out in that direction. I'd have to play with this a little bit more to kind of get it working, but this is closer to what I was thinking. You can see it's cascading out from there, especially in that specific point. Or it's going against the grain and going sideways. That might be what's happening. Yeah, it kind of looks like it. So it looks like it's kind of being pushed that way, which is cool. It's just we have to tweak our texture. It's all about understanding the texture. We can probably make some tools that will actually allow you to draw on this and then generate the texture itself from those wind values. So you could actually place a bunch of wind points and actually direct the wind how you wanted it to go. And then based on those, it would generate and like smooth out the vectors between everything. If you guys want to see that, we can look into it. Just let me know in the comments, because that's not really on my radar right now. It's just something I'm throwing out there. But I think we can leave this here. This kind of got us using texture maps, and it let us make our wind a little bit more dynamic. Well, the cool thing with this is we can actually apply more than just this. So for example, we could actually like shift this texture over time, and actually like if we have a rolling system that actually rolls waves of wind or something across the terrain, that's possible as well. We could make this far more complicated. It just really depends on what your game needs. And I don't really know that. And adding a bunch of really complicated like wind simulation stuff, if you don't need it, is just a waste of everybody's time. It's cool, I guess, but it's going to waste everybody who's playing your game's computer generating these cool wind effects that nobody's going to care about. So I'll leave this here. This is sort of how to do textures and look them up and then make wind out of them. So makes our wind cooler. But that's it for this video. So until next time, see you, Internet.